Good evening, everyone, and welcome to your special council meeting for Wednesday, December the 20th. Thank you to members of council for adding this extra meeting in this very busy month, and also to members of staff as well. I want to welcome all members of the public that are here this evening. Thank you for coming out, and all those that are watching online. Thank you for being with us this evening. I will let you know that you are being audio and video recorded and live streamed on the Town of Innisfil's YouTube channel, and this shall form part of the record, which will be retained in accordance with the town's retention bylaw. If you want more information about that bylaw, you can contact Clerk Services and they'd be happy to help you. So we have quorum this evening, so we'll call the meeting to order, and I would ask if Councillor Constantine would deliver the land acknowledgement, please.
The town of Innisfil acknowledges that Innisfil is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history. The town acknowledges that this land is the traditional territories of the First Peoples of Turtle Island. It is shared between the Anishinaabe peoples of Beausoleil First Nation, Chippewa of Rama First Nation, and Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, and we thank them for generations of stewardship. This meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people, and as settlers, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. The town acknowledges the forced sacrifices that are the foundation of Canadian society today. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nation, Métis, and Inuits.
Thank you, Councillor Constantine. Now we will go to item 2, which is the approval of tonight's agenda. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to approve the agenda as has been printed and circulated and advertised for the past week? Moved by Councillor Saunders and seconded by Councillor Ices. All those in favour? That is carried. Next is disclosure of interest. If there's anyone who has a conflict or a pecuniary interest on any of the items on tonight's agenda, if one becomes apparent to you during our discussions, please make it known at that time. So we'll start with item 4.1. 4.1 is a presentation that will be done by Jessica Jenkins, our Manager of Capital Engineering, and Jeremy Ninehouse, our Operations Specialist in Stormwater and Drainage. This presentation tonight is in response to a notice of motion that was put forward by Councillor Constantine to understand more about flooding issues in her ward, but in the town as general. So whenever you're ready.
Good evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor Fowler, and members of Council. My name is Jessica Jenkins, Manager of Capital Engineering, and with me tonight is Jeremy Ninehouse, Operations Specialist for Stormwater and Drainage. We're pleased to be here tonight to present this flood mitigation presentation to Council and highlight the works currently being undertaken and that are being considered by the town. This Council and previous councils have known the importance of flood mitigation in our community. It has been a strategic priority for the past number of years and has been further reinforced with the strategic plan update that was recently approved. Over the past several years, we've increased our service levels for flood mitigation through the addition of capital projects and programs to address specific flooding concerns, as well as the incorporation of drainage improvements into our infrastructure improvement projects. Additionally, we've increased our service levels with respect to both flooding prevention and emergency preparedness and response on the operational side also. The town currently has 5 major categories when it comes to flood mitigation efforts. These categories include routine maintenance on the operations side, master plans, stormwater infrastructure improvements, watercourse flooding improvements, and as a last resort, emergency management. Next slide, please. There are a number of considerations when it comes to undertaking these works. With this type of work, we want to ensure that we are providing value and benefit to the community. Our goal has been providing improvements with respect to day-to-day stormwater and drainage management, as well as for smaller storm and flooding events. We are also undertaking longer-term planning more holistically townwide to help address the larger storm and flooding events, and we are ensuring that development both considers and assists with flood mitigation in the community in the future. There are a number of limitations when it comes to what we can achieve. What is not feasible is complete elimination of flooding, in particular for larger storm and flooding events that happen on a less frequent basis. There are low-lying areas adjacent to Lake Simcoe where poor drainage and flooding issues are often caused by the water levels related to Lake Simcoe, which is federally regulated by Parks Canada as part of the larger Trans-Severn Waterway system. Additionally, cost can also be a limiting factor as these works are expensive to undertake. One avenue to help offset some of these costs is through grant funding. There are now several grant funding programs that are specifically geared towards natural disaster and flood mitigation, and the town has been successful in recent years applying for and receiving some of this grant funding for our projects. Another consideration is private property access and agreements. We often have to pursue private property access, easement agreements, and land acquisition in order to undertake these works. These works are also highly regulated, and as such, we have to go through an extensive permitting and approvals process. And finally, there are in-water works timing windows with respect to fisheries, as well as timing windows with respect to migratory birds that we have to work around for construction, which restricts the time of year that we're able to complete these works. I'll now pass it over to Jeremy.
Thanks, Jessica. The first effort of flood mitigation is routine maintenance of the town's stormwater network. The town's operating team completes routine maintenance tasks throughout the summer, which help mitigate flooding. The two main annual tasks are ditching, which includes the removal of vegetation, sediment, and debris of approximately 8 to 10 kilometers of roadside ditches annually, and culvert maintenance, which includes the flushing or steaming in winter of culverts and the replacement of culverts depending on their physical condition. These works will ensure that water can easily flow through our stormwater network unobstructed. Before winter, staff will also go to specific areas and remove thick vegetation from the ditches to alleviate potential flooding due to ice and blockages. In the winter and before any forecasted snow melt or rain event, staff try, weather permitting, to remove the hard-packed snow and ice upstream and downstream of specific culvert crossings that are known to freeze up and cause flooding issues in melt events. Next slide, please. The town has multiple master plans that tie into one another. Each one plays its own role when dealing with flood mitigation. The Stormwater Master Plan and Flooding Strategy Update, which is coming to Council in the new year, will be a strategic document that provides the direction for the management of stormwater runoff and its related infrastructure. More specifically, the flooding strategy component identifies and prioritizes areas of concern for flooding within Innisfil. Some of the top recommendations that will be assessed in the that will assist in flooding mitigation from the master plan update and flooding strategy are as follows. It is determined through modeling 20 high-risk flood locations within the town and has proposed projects of cost-effective, environmentally sustainable, and innovative solutions. It recommends the replacement of 116 culvert crossings due to capacity or physical condition. It recommends a policy and implementation of source control, which includes low-impact development, or LID, to treat water where it falls. And it also recommends the increase to our existing annual ditching cleanout program. Now I'll pass it back to Jessica to discuss stormwater infrastructure improvements.
Next slide, please. And thank you, Jeremy. Improvements to our drainage and storm sewer systems help provide additional capacity for stormwater management and drainage, which in turn assists with flood mitigation. Works that are completed under this category may include pond cleanouts and retrofits, ditch cleanouts or construction of new ditches and swales, culvert replacements, outlet improvements, and catch basin and storm sewer installations. We've also incorporated extensive drainage improvements through our larger infrastructure projects, such as parks and community spaces, road rehabilitation and construction, and bridge and culvert replacements. I'm now going to highlight a couple of recently completed projects and a couple that are currently underway. Next slide, please. So this is a project, the Ninth Line drainage improvements, that was recently completed by town staff. This project was to undertake drainage improvements along Ninth Line near Lake Simcoe, and these works were completed in conjunction with the Lakeside Park improvements in this area. This project included new culverts, a new outlet pipe, as well as a new naturalized channel to the lake. The project commenced in 2018 and construction was completed in 2020, and approximately $500,000 was the cost of the drainage-related works for this project. Next slide. Next project I'm going to highlight is the Park Road Drainage Improvements Project. This project was undertaken to implement solutions to alleviate standing water, flooding concerns, and improve overall drainage in the area. Works included ditch and outlet improvements, a new diversion channel through Innisfil Beach Park, which incorporated wetland features for additional storage. The design commenced in 2019 and construction was completed in 2022. The total cost of the drainage-related works was $1.526 million. This is a project where we received grant funding from both LSRCA and the provincial and federal governments through various grant programs. This project was also the recipient of the 2023 Healthy Water Award from LSRCA. Next slide, please. So another program that I want to highlight that is currently underway is our Various Roads Drainage Improvements Program. This program's been underway for a number of years now and targets specific areas of concern with respect to drainage and flooding throughout the community. We have 2 active projects within this program currently underway in the areas shown on the maps above. One that is south of the end of Ninth Line near Lake Simcoe, and the other in the Guildford area, also adjacent to Lake Simcoe. Both projects include culvert replacements, ditch improvements, and outlet upgrades, as well as repaving of some of the roads in the area. These projects commenced in 2021, and construction is tentatively planned for 2024 in the Guildford area and 2025 for the south of Ninth Line area, which is being planned to be done at the same time as some of the works that In Services is completing in that area also. The total budget for these 2 projects is $1.776 million. Next slide, please. The next category that I'm going to cover is watercourse flooding improvements. Watercourses, streams, and municipal drains within Innisfil can have a significant impact on flooding of adjacent properties and buildings within the community under certain conditions. As such, it's important to consider improvements and potential capacity increases to these watercourses and related infrastructure such as culverts, outlets, online storage, et cetera, to help mitigate flooding. We have several significant projects underway to address this type of flooding concern. Next slide, please. The first project I will highlight is Bellard Creek Diversion and Wetland Creation. So the LSRCA first completed an environmental assessment in this area that is shown on the map on the slide. The preferred conceptual design from the EA includes creating additional wetland storage area within Little Cedar Creek wetland, creation of a diversion channel and high-flow emergency outlet to provide capacity for larger storm events, improvements to Bellard Creek, as well as culvert replacement works in the area. In 2021, the town commenced the design phase, and construction is tentatively being planned to commence in 2025, subject to the completion of land acquisition, execution of permission to enter agreements and easement agreements from 30-plus landowners, and obtaining all of the necessary external agency permits. The project has a total approved budget of $6.722 million. And this is a project that we hope to apply for and secure grant funding through future grant funding intake programs. Next slide, please. So we currently have 2 projects underway to make improvements along Banks Creek. The first relates to improvements of the creek between St. John's Road and Cross Street, where we are completing embankment stabilization works, which includes new retaining walls and revetments. This project commenced in 2018, and construction has now been tendered, and we're planning to commence construction in 2024. This project has a total budget of $1.227 million. Next slide, please. Our second project along Banks Creek is for the section along 7th Line between 20th Side Road and St. John's, and includes watercourse realignment, additional storage, and naturalization and LID features being added to this section of the watercourse. The environmental assessment for this project was completed in 2019, and we did temporarily pause the design phase when the orbit development was introduced to allow us to assess any potential impacts to these works. We were able to recommence the project in 2023, and we are currently undertaking the design, with construction anticipated to commence in 2026, subject to the completion of land acquisition, significant utility relocation works, as well as Metrolinx and Conservation Authority and other agency approvals. The total budget for this project, which includes the road work portion as well, is $33.56 million. I'll now pass it back over to Jeremy.
Unfortunately, when we are faced with weather events that result in flooding, the operations team's emergency response is considered the last resort. We strive to lower the floodwater as quickly and safely as possible to alleviate any flooding and not cause it any more downstream. The operations team pull resources and staff away from their typical duties to deploy multiple pumps and hoses to pump and divert the water. We use signage, barrels, and pylons to keep traffic away and out of danger during these flood events. At the same time, staff are quick to communicate any road closure notices to emergency services, as well as notify them again once the roads have reopened. Next slide, please. We would like to thank Council for giving us the opportunity tonight to present what the town is doing to mitigate flooding in our municipality. At this time, if there are any questions that Council has regarding this presentation, we would be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica and Jeremy, very much for that presentation. Questions or comments from members of council? Deputy?
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I've seen you guys in action when the floods do hit, so I know how seriously you take these situations when they arise. For that, I thank you. Secondly, the major area that brings this report forward is usually the Bel Air Creek diversion area. Now, you mentioned additional wetland storage. My understanding is the elevation of the land is and the lake are almost identical, so when the water flows out, it has really nowhere to go. Am I correct in that assumption or understanding?
Through your worship to Deputy Mayor Fowler. The area that's adjacent to the lake, yes, that is a low-lying area. The area that we're looking at adding some additional storage capacity is further upstream of that in one of the wetlands that's further upstream. And so that will help alleviate some of the downstream flooding conditions, but it won't completely eliminate it due to some of the impacts based on Lake Simcoe water levels.
Follow-up, Deputy?
Thank you. Okay, so for the common man who doesn't have any ecological engineering degree, would you be able to give me an idea of what additional wetland storage looks like? So when someone comes to Councillor Constantine or myself, we can say, well, this is what it means, this is what steps are being taken, this is what's being done to mitigate the flow before it gets to their basements.
Jessica?
Through your worship to Deputy Mayor Fowler, I'll try and keep it as non-technical as I can. So yes, what we would be looking at adding is there is an existing wetland area along Little Cedar Creek. However, this project is proposing to expand the boundaries of that wetland in the sense of like adding some berms to add capacity, like almost like a basin, to provide additional storage. So it will act to provide additional storage through the addition of berms to allow more water to flow into that area under certain storm events. There is also going to be a diversion channel, so not only are we adding storage, we're also diverting some of the flows away from the area that's most affected by flooding and creating a new channel in order to take some of that flow under higher storm events and divert it into a different area through a different outlet to Lake Simcoe. So that will divert some of the water away from that area during large storm events also.
Thank you, Councillor Ices. And to Deputy Mayor Fowler, wetland, we used to call them swamps. Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question regarding Mr. Nyhouse stated that there's 8 to 10 kilometers of ditches that are dug out throughout Innisfil per year, and that's very encouraging from the farm community, because a lot of the land now is being systematically tiled. So that gets the water off farmlands a lot quicker. As farmers tile their lands, is there any maybe coordination as to where those 8 to 10 kilometers are dug out, just to alleviate some of the impacts that all of a sudden farmland is draining quicker to allow the crops to grow better, but there's excess water that's flowing into the ditches? And if they're not dug out, then I assume that causes more problems as well. So just maybe a question on, is there any coordination with where you see flows coming off, private farmlands, and where those ditches are dug out?
Mr. Ninehouse?
Through your worship to Councillor Ices. Currently, our ditching program relies on or is complaint driven. We're hoping that in future budgets we'll be able to put more money towards an actual ditching program where we can specify where we can move forward, and then we can work with landowners who plan to systematically drain their tiles, so that we can coordinate better, so that we're not having someone dumping water on other people without their knowledge.
Thank you for that. The second question I had is with regards to when projects are done and ditches are new again on roadsides and whatever. And I guess the example I'll use, which is maybe not a fair example because it's a county project, is the Innisfil Beach Road right here. So we've improved the road. We put better drainage in the ditches, but we ditched them to look after like your 100-year event. So these ditches are incredibly deep. And then, so my question is, who would have to maintain those ditches now that run in front of private residents? And how do we deal with those challenges that they're going to have maintaining it due to the steepness of the slopes and the grass that's going to grow there? So maybe a question on how that works.
Is that a Ms. Bowman question, Director Bowman question, or who wants to respond to that one? Mr. Ninehouse?
Through your worship to Councillor Ices. So when road construction is done, it would be the road authority that would take over the maintenance of those ditches. So if it was a town-owned road, it would be our operating team that would go out and do the ditching work. If it is a county road, it would be up to the county to complete any maintenance requirements. And when roads are being constructed, the operation team is notified, and we do look at the drawings to make sure that what is built can be maintained moving forward.
Yeah, so that's concern that has come up with the residents along Innisfil Beach Road, and as I said before, that is a county road. So you're suggesting that if we have a ditch in front of a previously sodded ditch that's now very steep, and the grass is too long for a lawnmower to cut, it's going to be the county's responsibility to keep that maintained? Am I understanding that correctly?
Mr. Ninehouse?
Through your worship. So the maintenance of the ditch itself, when it comes to maintaining and removing any sediment or blockages, would be up to the county. I believe it would be up to the resident to maintain the grasses if they wanted it to be kept neat and tidy.
So then I guess follow-up would be a comment that a lot of residents do take a lot of pride in being able to maintain the grass in those ditches, and that if there could be maybe a compromise between the design department and the resident on making the ditch more easy to maintain. I think Innisfil Beach Road's a good example because it's just finished, and I can imagine as their ward councillor, I'll get some calls next year about how in the world are we going to maintain this grass that is in a ditch too steep to get a lawnmower down. So just a comment.
Thank you, Councillor Ices. Other comments or questions? Councillor Sinella, then Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You mentioned that through the procedures that it will alleviate a lot of the problem, but not completely. So at the end of the day, properties that are located on the wetlands, while we'll see less flooding due to these measures, but it's not going to, they're still going to flood. They're just going to flood because of the nature of the beast, the way they're located. The property is located on a wetland, and there's really not much else that can be done, correct? My other question was, you also mentioned that we have applied for grants. So have we received grant money for a lot of these projects that are in right now that we're doing?
Ms. Jenkins?
Through your worship to Councillor Zanella, we have been successful on a couple of projects with respect to grant funding. One of the ones we were successful on was Park Road drainage improvements through multiple grants on that one. We have done some grant applications that haven't been successful through the National Disaster Mitigation Program. However, that is one that we're looking to try and get some grant funding for some of these works that are currently in the design phase or works that will come out of the Stormwater Master Plan and Flooding Strategy implementation that will be, presented for future budget cycles. So yeah, we have had a little bit of success with getting some grant funding, and it's definitely something we want to continue to pursue as we move forward with some of these projects.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Worship. Just want to make a comment on the area that the Deputy Mayor was talking about. That project there is a very, very innovative project in terms of dealing with stormwater. Normally, when you get a stormwater management pond, it takes care of some of the flooding that goes on, but it doesn't really clean the water. In fact, some cases it makes the water quality worse. But this project here is actually using the existing wetland, which is, its function is to store water, but it also cleans water with all of the biology in terms of the green plants that are already there. So what they're planning on doing is basically to use an existing wetland, to making it bigger to store more water so it mitigates, and then they're going to be diverting water from a creek that normally doesn't flow into that wetland. And being able to control it. And the nice thing about it is that we don't want all that sediment getting into the wetland itself and destroying the wetland. So they have a pre-pond which will take all the sediment and it will stop it from going to the wetland. So the wetland will keep on functioning as a wetland to keep high water quality. So it's a very, very innovative project. I sat on the board when that was originally looked at. So it's an excellent progress. So I can't wait to see the results of it when it's all finished.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions or comments on this? Councillor Constantine.
I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Andrea, Nicole, Jessica, and all the staff that is working on this project. We are aware that it will not be 100%, because something is out of your control. But at least, we are trying to do our best so that, to mitigate the flooding in these areas. So I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Constantine. Anyone else? So I think this is a really good kind of commercial to January when we see the full flooding strategy for the entire municipality and all of the recommendations that come with it. Really looking forward to seeing that. I know it's been, I'm thinking, over a year in development, and I correct me, 3 or 4 public meetings on the subject. I remember the one, I think the most populated one was at the Lefroy Community Center, and that was a night when it was raining quite heavily. So it was good to get all the comments, and we had really good input from all the communities really in Innisfil on how to do this. But again, with climate change being what it is and more frequent significant events happening, and we can only assume those are going to continue to happen. The 100-year storm is a bit of a misnomer. I've been mayor for 5 years and we've had 2. We've had flooding in areas we have never flooded before. In front of Rod Zesso there that last summer, that was significant. And so the problem's going to get worse, so it's great that we're investing in this significant work to do what we can to mitigate, as well as using our emergency response as a last resort. So if you're interested in flooding mitigation and you live in an area that has flooding, please pay attention to our January 2024, I'm not sure which meeting it's going to be on, January the 10th meeting, where we'll have another presentation with our specialists in flood mitigation, Aquafor Beach, who will be coming and doing a full presentation on flooding throughout the municipality. So with that, I thank you very much for your presentation tonight, and thank you, Councillor Constantine, for bringing it forward so we can better understand the efforts that we put in place. I need a mover and a seconder, please, for the recommendation. Councillor Constantine and Deputy Mayor Fowler. All those in favor of receiving this as information, and that's carried. Thank you very much. We'll now go to item 2, which is a planning public meeting. So this is a bit of a script I'll be reading from, because planning public meetings are regulated under the Planning Act, and they're quite prescriptive as far as what has to be done and when. So we'll now move to the planning public item on tonight's special council agenda. One planning application is being brought forward this evening for information and public consultation purposes only, with no decision being made tonight. Tonight's item concerns a proposed amendment to the town's comprehensive zoning bylaw, number 080-13, for the address 1176 Second Line in the town of Innisfil. We'll start with presentations from staff and then the consultant on behalf of the applicant. Council may have a few questions or comments, and then we'll have an opportunity for our public consultation, where we will hear from members of the public. All speakers will initially have 5 minutes to ask your questions or express your comments. Then staff or the consultant will respond where possible. If there isn't an immediate response to your question this evening, the response will be provided in the staff report that will come forward when council will debate the application. Should anyone need to speak a second time after everyone's had one opportunity, then there'll be a second opportunity to come up and speak if there's items that have not been raised already. After all members of the public have provided comment, council will receive the information. Should any member of the public that's watching the live stream wish to make a comment, they can email Clerk Services, and these comments will be provided to council and town staff and taken into consideration before council makes their final decision. You may also be added to the circulation list as an interested party, where you will be kept updated on any future information regarding this item. And I believe there is something on the table outside if you're interested in being on that list. And also if you can contact the clerk's office if you're interested in watching online. The email will be listed on the PowerPoint during the meeting and is also available on tonight's agenda that can be found on the town's website. We'll now hear from Clerk Patty Toma on how public notice of this meeting was provided.
Thank you, Your Worship. In accordance with the Planning Act, notice for this public meeting was mailed to all landowners within 120 meters of the subject lands and to all required agencies on November 30th, 2023. Corresponding signage was also posted on the subject lands on November 30th as well. Information and materials respecting the application were posted on the town's Get Involved website for review and commenting.
Thank you, Clerk Toma. Has any correspondence been received by the clerk's office concerning this item?
No, Your Worship, no correspondence has been received by Clerk's office regarding this application. However, members of the public may provide comment or register their interest regarding this item during this meeting or up until Council makes a decision by contacting the Clerk's office.
Thank you, Clerk Toma. We'll now hear from Stephen Montgomery, Supervisor of Development Planning, who will provide a high-level summary of the planning context of the application. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery.
Thank you. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of council, staff, and the public. The purpose of this public meeting this evening is to consider an application for a zoning bylaw amendment on lands known municipally as 1176 Second Line in the town of Innisfil. Next slide, please. The purpose of this application is the applicant is proposing to rezone a portion of their lands from AG to AG exception zone to facilitate a wedding and event venue as an on-farm diversified use. Specifically, the applicant, through a subsequent site plan control application and building permits, proposes to convert the existing large barn for a main event venue, another small barn on the property to be used for storage. They are also proposing a temporary outdoor pop-up kitchen preparation station, a ceremony area, temporary washroom trailer, a parking area with 39 spaces, and 2 additional barrier-free parking spaces. Next slide, please. And this is the subject lands outlined in yellow. They have frontage on the second line, just north of Guildford, containing farm uses and some natural environmental features, including significant woodlands and unevaluated wetlands on the eastern portion, which the applicant is not proposing to impact. The area proposed to be rezoned for the on-farm diversified use is the orange area on the slide. The entire site is just over 40 hectares. The orange rezoned area is less than 2% of the subject lands at about 0.7 hectares. To provide some further background, as stated in the staff report, staff note this property was used during the 2023 season for weddings and special events, which is in contravention of the existing zoning bylaw. Also, no building permits were obtained for the use of the barn for events, and therefore there are issues that would need to be resolved respecting compliance with the Ontario Building Code and the Fire Code. Orders were issued by the town about the zoning and building contraventions, as well as a noise order, and the town has advised the property owner to cease operation until necessary approvals are obtained, which of course would include a rezoning application if it was approved by council, followed by staff approval of site plan agreement and building permits. Next slide, please. So in support of this application, the applicant has provided a zoning application and a draft zoning bylaw amendment, a concept site plan, a planning justification report, a traffic brief, and a vegetation protection enhancement and restoration plan. Next slide. So the applicant will speak in more details about their concept site plan, but essentially the red line is the zoning boundary, and the site plan on the screen shows the existing lane access from the second line. There's a proposed parking area to the north. It shows the existing buildings. There's a proposed, basically a turning circle, a vegetative restoration area, which is in the black hatching to the east of the rezoning, abutting the existing environmental features as requested by the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. Next slide, please. So staff have done a high-level review of relevant planning policy framework, which is in attachment 4 to the report before you this evening, including a review of the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, the Lake Simcoe protection plan, county official plan, local official plan, and the town zoning bylaw. Next slide. So comments received thus far are from the county. County has no objections as long as matters are addressed related to the secondary nature of the use on the property, that it does not hinder agricultural operations, that it is limited in area and demonstrates consistency with the natural heritage policies of the province and of the county's official plan. Staff also note that the subject lands have a federal ecological gift, Oak Ridges Marine Land Trust conservation easement agreement on title, and staff are reviewing the implications of this easement agreement with the applicant. Staff also understand that the applicant has been in contact with the Oak Ridges Marine Land Trust to discuss their proposal further in the context of the regulations that are put on the property through that easement agreement that's on title. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, staff will review and consider all the comments received on this proposal and report back to council at a future council meeting recommending whether the proposed rezoning should be approved. Notice would be provided respecting when this report is returning to council for consideration to all those who requested notification or submitted written correspondence for this public meeting, and that includes any correspondence on Get Involved Innisfil.ca website, as well as any emails or letters that are received. Staff note that, as mentioned, site plan control would also be required if this zoning was approved by council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. We'll now hear from Nick Scarrett, Senior Planner, Innovative Planning Solutions, on behalf of the applicant and provide further context to the application. I believe Mr. Scarrett is joining us online.
Good evening, Mayor Dolan, council members, staff, and the public. My name is Nick Scarrett with Innovative Planning Solutions, here to speak on behalf of the owner in attendance tonight for the lands municipally known as 1176 Second Line. I unfortunately could not be in person at tonight's public meeting. However, it is great to see everybody. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of the proposed development and zoning bylaw amendment and receive feedback from council and the public in attendance tonight. The intent of this application is to facilitate the rezoning of a portion of the agricultural lands to agricultural general with exceptions in order to permit and facilitate development of a wedding and event use as an on-farm diversified use within the existing barn structure. Next slide, please. The subject site shown in red contains total lot area of 40.45 hectares with approximately 600 meters of frontage along the second line. The property contains a large active farm operation and mature vegetation area. There are 2 farm-related structures that will continue to be used for farm-related storage. An existing farmhouse, which has been in existence since 1924 and converted to a legal 2-unit dwelling, is located near the second line. The farmhouse and the agricultural storage buildings are to remain and do not form part of this rezoning application. The structures related to the rezoning application are an existing historic barn currently used as a wedding and event venue use, along with a small utility building, temporary washroom facilities, and a parking area. Access to the site and all structures are used and uses are for singular access from a driveway, access from the second line. It can be noted that no new structures are proposed. Next slide, please. This slide provides a high-level overview of surrounded land uses from the subject property. As you can see in this image, there's a lot of farm and mature vegetation areas on and around the subject property shown with red outline. Further to the east are shoreline residential areas along Lake Simcoe and open storage with residential to the south. All agricultural and vegetative areas are to remain on the subject lands to ensure protection of natural features and maintain the historic countryside feel. Next slide, please. This slide provides a high-level overview of the county and town official plans with respect to the subject property. The county official plan designates these lands as agricultural, shown in light brown, and green lands shown in light green on the upper image. I apologize for image quality. The town's official plan designates these lands as agricultural, shown in brown, and key natural heritage features shown in green. These lands are also designated countryside as per Schedule A of the official plan. As you can see, the town's official plan designations align with the county designations, and it is important to note that no amendment to the county and town official plans are necessary for the proposed wedding and event venue use. For reference, the wedding and event venue use would be completely located within the agricultural designation and complies with these policies. Next slide, please. Building off the policy framework of the official plan, the town's zoning bylaw is an implementation tool that contains specific regulations on uses, setbacks, parking, building height, and landscaped areas. This slide shows an existing zone of the property. The property currently zoned agricultural and environmentally protected. On the agricultural zone portion of the property, centrally located, you can see the barn structures, and it can be noted that the proposed rezoning will completely occur on the agricultural portion and will not encroach in the environmental protected zone area. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment intends to rezone a portion of the agricultural lands to agricultural general with exemptions in order to permit and facilitate the development of a wedding and event venue use as an on-farm diversified use. I will go into greater detail of the criteria and classifications on on-farm diversified use shortly. Next slide, please. This slide provides a site plan concept of the area as part of the rezoning proposal outlined in red. The portion of the property is intended to be rezoned includes the existing driveway, existing barn and utilities building, a ceremony area, temporary washroom trailer, and parking area. The driveway loop area provides for emergency vehicle drop-off areas, and the parking area shown on the concept is gravel. That is a typo or a mistake on that plan, and the parking area will remain as grass in line with protection measures and not contain a gravel surface. The rezone is to permit the existing barn structure and area identified in red for the wedding and event venue use. This area does not impact the existing farm operation or encroach onto the existing farm portion of the property. No impacts to the existing vegetation are proposed, and no trees will be removed with this proposal. Through discussions with the town and Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority, additional vegetation protection, enhancement, and restoration area is proposed to the east, as noted in the hatched area. This will serve to add additional protection and enhancement of the natural features which are protected through provincial, county, and municipal legislation. This proposal not only assists with protection of natural features, rather provides for opportunities to enhance and restore an area not used for farming or the intended use. The two structures located outside this area intend to be rezoned are the existing farm-related structures that will remain and used for existing farm operation. The parking area, setbacks, and all of the zoning regulations are in compliance with the agricultural zone provisions of the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. The area noted in red is intended to be rezoned from agricultural to agricultural specific for the wedding and event venue use as an on-farm diversified use. The remaining portion of the property will continue to be rezoned general and environmentally protected, be used for a farming operation. The intent of having a site-specific area zoned for a wedding and event venue use is to ensure the protection of existing farm operation while providing for an added agro-tourism uses within this area. Next slide, please. As you may be wondering, what are on-farm diversified uses and how does this relate to this proposal? The subject lands are identified as prime agricultural lands through the provincial policy statement, better known as the PPS. Section 2.3.3 of the PPS notes that on-farm diversified uses, such as the proposed wedding and event venue use, are permitted within prime agricultural areas, provided they are compatible with and do not hinder surrounding agricultural operations. Through the PPS, on-farm diversified uses are defined as follows. Means uses that are secondary to the principal agricultural use of the property and are limited in area. On-farm diversified uses include, but are not limited to, home occupations, home industries, agro-tourism uses, and uses produced through value-added agricultural products. Through discussions with the town, the proposed development can be classified as an agro-tourism use, and the definition from the PPS is as follows. Means those farm-related tourism uses, including limited accommodations such as bed and breakfast, that promotes the enjoyment, education, or activities related to the farm operation. The PPS also offers guiding policies for rural area and rural lands for a number of activities that would support the viability of the rural areas, such as the diversification of economic base, diversification of employment opportunities, providing opportunities for sustainable and diversified tourism, and opportunities to support a diversified rural economy should be promoted by protecting agricultural and other resource-related uses. The wedding and event venue use will be strategically located within a delineated area to direct the development away from actively farmed agricultural lands and thereby ensuring the unimpeded continuation of the farm operation. The proposed use will also support the rural economy by diversifying the economic base and offering various employment opportunities deriving from weddings and other events such as catering, photography, and event coordination. Opportunities for sustainable tourism can also arise from the proposed wedding and event venue use by supporting agritourism businesses. The proposal conforms to and is consistent with the guidelines on permitted uses in the Ontario prime agricultural areas. Overall, the proposed wedding and event venue use is permitted as an on-farm diversified use classified as an agritourism use, meeting the provincial, county, and town policies. The purpose of the rezoning a portion of these lands is to align with the zoning permissions to establish permitted policies, resulting in all forms of legislation aligning for the wedding and event venue use to continue. Next slide, please. This slide provides a policy and regulatory summary of the applicable planning documents. The proposal aligns with and maintains established policy visions for this area as stipulated through the PPS, growth plan, county official plan, and town official plan. The zoning change contributes to protection of existing farming operations surrounding the character through the reuse of an existing structure. The proposed utilizes the historic countryside character to create opportunities for agritourism and economic growth. The proposal meets the guidelines for on-farm diversified uses while ensuring enhancement and protection of natural features without impacting existing farm operations. The subject lands have an additional protection element compared to other properties within the area. The subject lands have a unique restrictive covenant land agreement registered on title through the Oak Ridges Marine Land Trust. In short, this agreement ensures the protection of the farm operation of vegetated areas along with the historic farm structures. Through review of this agreement, the proposal not only ensures protection of the farm operation of vegetative areas, rather further protects it by providing additional restoration measures supported by the Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority. The existing historic farm structures are preserved through this proposal, which aligns with the restrictive covenant to ensure the characteristics of this property are maintained in place. We have provided the Land Trust with notification of this proposal as required by the agreement to ensure open communication and that the proposal aligns with the protection measures. A site visit by the members of the Land Trust Committee with the owners was conducted on December 1st, 2023, resulting in supportive observations of the proposed uses and protection measures. Next slide, please. In conclusion, the purpose of the requested rezoning amendment is to rezone a portion of the subject lands from agricultural general to agricultural exemption to reflect the conversion of an existing barn structure and associated area to allow for a wedding and event venue use. The proposal is consistent and aligns with provincial planning interests and policies, supports preservation and protection of agricultural and natural heritage features, and provides opportunities by diversifying the economic base within the countryside landscape. We have reviewed all the comments submitted for this public meeting, including comments received today from the Land Trust. We acknowledge these comments and will work with all applicable agencies to address each comment as needed. Next slide, please. This concludes the presentation, and I would be happy to take any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scarrett. Are there any questions from members of council? Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a couple questions. You're saying you're going to renovate the barn. We haven't heard how many people are going to be in there or how many, like how many tables, like how many customers are in there. Because if it's more than like say 100, I don't think 39 parking spaces is even going to be close enough. So can somebody address that question? And I do have another question after that.
Mr. Scarrett, do we know the occupation of the barn?
Yes, through your worship, to address council's question. The occupancy load is targeted for 150 people. Through the zoning bylaw, as the intended use would fall within a banquet hall, the zoning bylaw stipulates how a banquet hall or similar like this type of use would be calculated for required parking, which comes out to 39 spaces plus 2 barrier-free spaces for a total of 41 spaces. On the site plan sketch provided in the package, it does show additional areas to the south portion of the barn, the existing barn, that allows for overflow parking on the grassed area. That would be utilized as additional parking if necessary.
Thank you. Councillor Saunders?
Thank you. And one more question. While we're on the topic of barrier-free, is the barn going to be barrier-free and your temporary washrooms going to be barrier-free as well? Because a lot of times the washrooms are not.
Can you answer that, Mr. Scarrett?
Yes, through your worship. We currently have an architect retained that is analyzing the barn and providing for all Ontario Building Code and Fire Code regulations that are necessary for this type of use, which would include barrier-free access to the building, as well as it would be necessary for those barrier-free washrooms to be provided as well.
Thank you. Go ahead. One more.
Thank you. And I think this one's for the town. When we put a cease operations on the barn and the venue, did they cease operations immediately or did they continue to keep going?
Ms. Lee?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Through to Councillor Saunders. The letter that was provided to them requested that they cease operations, and they did continue through the 2023 season.
Other questions? Councillor Drodge.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question, well, I have a few. My first one is concerning the farmhouse. I noticed it's not in the rezoning. Has it been used as part of the event space currently?
I don't quite know who to direct that question to. Mr. Scarrett?
Through your worship, the existing two-unit dwelling is currently vacant at this time. However, it is not part of this proposal and will not be utilized for this use.
Councillor Drodge?
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, maybe I'm saying it wrong. I need a little more clarity. I'm asking if the farmhouse has been used as part of the event wedding venue previously.
Mr. Scarrett, if you can't answer that, we'll leave that with staff to provide an answer when the report comes forward. Can you answer that, Mr. Scarrett?
Through your worship, I'll try my best. From my knowledge, there may be times when they use those buildings for maybe photographs or maybe potentially storage, but based on this proposal, we're not looking to utilize that structure for this use.
Councillor Drodge?
Okay, just a final comment then. So it is advertised on the Rustic Silo website that it is a bridal suite, and there are many reviews stating that it has been used all season long. So just for clarification, it is being currently used under Rustic Silo, and I would like to know why it's not in the survey. And my other question would be for fire suppression. I'm assuming you're going to need a retention pond, and I don't see that in the zoning either. Are you allowed to have that retention pond on agricultural lands, or does it have to be inside the new zoning?
I'll go to Mr. Montgomery for that. Part of the issue with the report is that it doesn't indicate what the contraventions to the fire code and the building code are. So perhaps we have the fire chief here, and we have Director Lee. If it's appropriate, I understand this is a planning meeting, and site plan, we have delegated that authority to staff. However, it is in the planning report that there are contraventions, so I think it's appropriate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. I'll perhaps address that. So staff were intentionally not specific in the staff report. There are a number of building code and fire code areas that would have to be addressed through the barn facilities, fire suppression. Those items would be specifically addressed through the site plan control process. So there is more detail that is still required for both building and fire staff to assess how the contraventions that are currently in place will be addressed. So that's kind of the next part of the process, is that detailed site plan that needs to be submitted. And we noted in the report that while we have the conceptual plan, we don't have those details. Mr. Scarrett has indicated that, they have an architect working on addressing that, and that information is required by staff to provide further review.
Go ahead, Councillor.
One follow-up question then. So my guess an easier question to answer would be, would the retention pond, if it was required for fire suppression, would it have to be in the new zoning area, or could it be outside of the zoning area in agricultural land?
Mr. Montgomery?
Yeah, through your worship, in our opinion, it would have to be within, because it's serving the use.
So just to clarify, so I believe it was mentioned it was 0.8 of the overall size of the lands that could be used for this space. So realistically, then we should probably be looking at a bigger area to make sure that they even have the area coverage for this proposed venue, if something like that would have to be included.
Mr. Montgomery?
Again, through your worship, yes, we can consider that. If there's additional measures that are required under the fire code and so forth, we'd be reviewing that prior to this zoning amendment coming back, so that we know that the exact area required for the rezoning, if considered and approved by council, would conform with the site plan. So there's a bit of iterative work that needs to happen there prior to this being approved.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Waters because okay, go ahead, Councillor Drosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. The final question's around outdoor pop-up kitchen and how that operates. I'm not really familiar how something like that would operate. I'm sure it would need water. So there's also no mention of any kind of water service to this property. Are they using the existing well, and is that in the zoning area also?
Mr. Montgomery or Mr. Scarrett?
Excuse me, through your worship, there is a well that's proposed to be used. I believe Nick Scarrett might be able to speak to it. I'm not sure whether the well is within the proposed zone boundary sketch that they provided.
Mr. Scarrett, can you speak to that?
Through your worship, yes, there's an existing utility building noted on the concept plan that does contain the existing well in that structure, which would facilitate any water usage potentially for that pop-up kitchen. Those pop-up kitchens are pretty standard when it comes to outdoor style wedding and event venue uses through the cater consultant.
Thank you. Councillor Waters, I'm sorry, I'd written your name down and I skipped over you.
That's all right. I have a few questions about this. First of all, how many weddings per year do we plan on having at this facility?
Mr. Scarrett?
Your worship, you're typically looking at weddings starting in May and running till about the end of October. Those, as you can imagine, those wedding and event venue uses would occur on the weekends. So potentially one or two each weekend over that series of time. So I don't know the calculation off the top of my head, Councillor Waters, but it would only occur over the shoulder seasons to have those events.
How many weddings did they have last year?
Through your worship. I do not know how many wedding events they had last year. I'll probably jump that to the owner who is in attendance there tonight to maybe come up to the podium and ask that question or answer that question.
Mr. Young?
Good evening, everyone. Rick Young, I'm the owner of the property that we're talking about. Through you, your worship, to answer the question of the councillor. Last year we had approximately 23 events. No, not at all. It's a very soft use change to the property. It's not a Monday to Friday event. It's potentially just weekends. Thank you.
Just another question to staff then. How is there a guideline in terms of when a property gets used to that extent that it requires a permanent septic system as opposed to a temporary washroom system that it currently has?
Director Lee?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan, through to Councillor Waters. So those, again, are the building code items in terms of the seasonal potential nature. The building code really doesn't identify seasonal. There are specific temporary requirements, but those are very specific to tent structures. So that is, again, one of those site plan items that has to be reviewed, both in terms of the kitchen facility and also the washroom facilities.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question. When it comes to the well, which Councillor Drage brought up, because it's being used for commercial purposes, what are the health regulations in terms of testing that water on a regular basis to make sure that there's no health concerns around it?
So I'll probably take that one as well, just from past experience. So that would be under the requirements of the health unit in terms of running commercial events at the property, and they would identify through their legislative requirements how often that has to be done, and they would inspect it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. Maybe just a few comments. Being in the agricultural community, I'm definitely in favor of secondary ways to make income on agricultural properties, and I'm just looking at the website, and it's just a beautiful old barn. Like everybody would want to have their wedding there, I think. So I think we should be encouraging that. So how do we do that within the framework that we have in place in the town? A week or so ago, we had our economic development department come out with their report, and I know one of the bullet points is agritourism. We need to support agritourism. So my concern is we've got a seasonal use facility, and we're treating it like it's a regular wedding hall in town. I know this is just for a public consultation. I'm just wondering if we have in our rules a place where agriculture tourism can fit. We may come back and tell the applicant that, you know what, we need a fire suppression pond, and we need a new septic system, and we need a whole bunch of different things to make this up to code. But the cost of that will make this business plan not feasible for the 23 events that they want to have during the season. So I guess that is my question, is as we want to promote agritourism, is there a slot for it in the rules that we have? Or maybe that's not a discussion that we're talking about tonight, but perhaps it's part of this.
Director Lee?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Through to Councillor Ises. So Mr. Scarrett did talk about there are on-farm diversified policies from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and there's a number of guidelines that speak to what is considered through that process. The applicant's going through the rezoning process, but it doesn't negate them ensuring from an assembly occupancy perspective of that barn that it meets all of the legislative requirements for the fire and building codes. So we need to work through that with the applicant and their architect in terms of what they're proposing to address compliance, and then have it reviewed internally. So we're not at that point, but that would have to be addressed before, as Mr. Montgomery indicated, the recommendation report would come forward.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what that entails, so thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Worship. I'm all in favor of agricultural tourism, so I think these venues are welcomed. I just want to make sure that they're safe. So, if somebody gets sick or something happens because we didn't do our job, our due diligence, I think that would be a tragedy. And so I think the questions that council are asking are just to make sure that, yes, we like agricultural tourism, we just want to make sure it's safe for all those involved in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I had one, and that was the on-farm diversification policies. Have they been in the Planning Act for many years, or is this something relatively new?
To your worship, it's relatively new. A few years ago, OMAFRA came out with some guidelines about what is an on-farm diversified use, and the PPS has a statement that basically says agritourism could be considered a subset of on-farm diversified uses. So our official plan does speak to that, stating that those describing those uses as farm-related tourism uses that promote the enjoyment, education, or activities related to the farm operation. So it's something that when the growth plan from the province came out, there were, and the PPS just before it, there were major restrictions on what you can do in prime agricultural areas. So to diversify some of those uses, even within the prime agricultural uses, the province did come out with some guidelines.
Thank you. And I just wanted to point out, this isn't the first time that Innisfil's been down this road. There was a wedding venue that the town was not aware of, actually discovered when emergency services were called to the site. They did go through a rezone. There was no such thing as on-farm diversified uses then, but complied with the conditions for building code and fire, and that business is active today. There was another one just north of Cookstown that was also unaware that they needed to get a permit, and they found that the conditions were too onerous, so they stopped their activity there. So this is not uncommon, and something where I feel we have to. We do want to encourage these uses, but we want to make sure that everybody is safe and that it's a fair process for everyone who's gone through it. Seeing no other comments, we'll now hear from members of the public who have questions regarding this item. I understand that no one has registered virtually to speak, so I'll call on those here in attendance at Town Hall to come forward to the podium and state your name for the record. Please come forward.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, welcome.
My name's Mike Hayes. I live on Limerick Street, which is at the bottom of the second line. And I guess my questions are this. Last year, there were events that took place at the farm, and I'm wondering whether they had permission to do so. It sounds like from the sign that was on the driveway that it's going to be like an Airbnb pop-up situation with portable this, portable that, which we don't need in the area. The fact that we're going to have the noise, those of us who live close by, and I don't think there are too many of the councillors who live in my area, so they won't be affected. And I guess the other thing is, if this was done last summer and we have bylaws that we're all supposed to follow, then this group, whoever owned the farm, did not follow what the rest of us have to do all the time. And I think that sort of sets, to me, a precedent of the possibility of the kind of people that we're dealing with here who are going to try and maneuver their way through and around loopholes and just do what they want to do. And I don't think it's right. I think it's, if you want to be in the game, follow the rules, make the application. This is why they're doing it this year. I assume last year they didn't ask for permission. I don't know if they did or they didn't. All I know is that tents popped up. There were cars up the driveway. There were people there. And those events took place. So I don't know how you're going to make this decision, but I think you have to be very, very sensitive to the area, to the people who live there, as to what we are going to deal with, not you, and what we're going to have to deal with late in the evening, Friday night, Saturday night, whatever the situation may be. One thing will lead to another, and we will be the people who will have to deal with it. So at that point, I would say that I think you've really got to do some serious thinking as to whether you want to amend the bylaw. It's not a working farm now. In all the years I've been coming up, I don't think I've ever seen a tractor on it. There was a horse on the farm several years ago, and that's about it. And someone is living in the house because it's lit up and there are cars driving into the house. But as far as the farm goes, being a working farm, I have not seen any activity that, to me, indicates that it's in progress. But my big concern is what took place last summer is not a mea culpa situation. It's strictly the rules are the rules. I need to follow them. My neighbors need to follow them. And the people who own this farm need to follow the rules and play fairly and honestly. And that's my point. Okay?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Hayes. Anyone else who would like to make a comment? There we go. Welcome.
Evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, Councillors. My name is Jesse. I am a resident of Guildford, along with my wife and 3 young children, ages 2 through 7. I live in close proximity to this barn. My concerns are as follows. With the zoning of the event center and the growth of this new business in our area, is there a plan to contain the noise in this newly zoned area? As the event center operates currently, the music is very audible through the walls of my residence. I can account many Fridays, Saturdays, and some weekdays at about 9 p.m. through the night, encourage my children to try to go back to sleep. That's my experience to date. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we get your full name, please? I'm sorry.
Jesse Fax.
Jesse Fax, thank you. And noise attenuation will be identified in the report. Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak to this item? I'll ask one more time. Anyone else who'd like to speak to this item? Going, gone. Thank you. Madam Clerk, was there anyone that had comments come in over the live stream?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, nothing has been received by the clerk's email.
We'll now go to the recommendation to receive the comments provided this evening. Can I please have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Drodge, seconded by Councillor Richardson. All those in favor of receiving this as information? That's carried. Anyone who wishes to provide comment may still do so and may also register as an interested party to be contacted before this item is considered by council. Please contact the clerk's office at clerksoffice@innisfil.ca. Council thanks everyone for their participation with this public planning item. And we'll just take a 1-minute break because I'm sure some people will want to leave. And then we'll go to our next delegation, which is Keith McKinnon, co-chair of the Developers Liaison Group regarding staff report DSR 174-23. Thank you everyone for participating. I'll ask council just to stay in your seats if you would, please. Thank you, everyone. We'll now go to item 4.3 and welcome Keith McKinnon, the co-chair of the Developers Liaison Group, to the podium. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council, staff, members of the public that are here. So as stated, my name is Keith McKinnon. Typically, I'm here before you as a professional planner with KLM Planning Partners, Inc., but I'm actually here before you this evening as the co-chair of the Developers Liaison Group, position I've held since its inception when former CAO Scorbahatch originally incepted the group, really as a means for the development industry and town staff to work together on various issues as it relates to building a better Innisfil. So I'm here before you this evening as it relates to item 4.4, which is a proposed update to the town's fee bylaw. So firstly, on behalf of the Developers Liaison Group, we certainly do appreciate all the work that staff have undertaken, particularly through co-chair Ms. Lee and Mr. CAO, Mr. Gershow, in addition to your consultant, BMA Consulting. We had a number of opportunities and meetings with your consultant and staff to work through the many issues and items that were addressed. But ultimately, we are here before you this evening with a recommendation that we appreciate all the work that has been undertaken. We certainly recommend and wish to see that council approves this new fee bylaw. Frankly, Innisfil is the only municipality that I'm aware of in 23 years that ever worked on a situation where staff actually invoice time via applications as opposed to a fixed fee. And I've worked in pretty well every municipality across this great province. So we're certainly happy to see that Innisfil is moving towards a fixed fee component so that we have a standardized process similar to all your neighbors. And what that ultimately does is helps to provide land developers and home builders certainly a much better idea of exactly what their application fees are going to be. Because the way that it was previously, you had a base fee and then there was a $5,000 working deposit, but that typically never covered the work, obviously, that staff would take on each individual planning application. So ultimately, in the end, you never really knew exactly how much your application fees were going to cost. So now, by moving to a fixed fee scenario, developers and home builders will certainly know that up front, and I think that's a benefit to everyone. So with that, Your Worship and members of council, happy to answer any questions, but we're certainly appreciative of the work undertaken and do request that council approve the recommendation this evening on the new fee bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon, for your delegation. Questions or comments to Mr. McKinnon? I have one, sir, if I could. Sure. So we have an application, possibly by KLM Planning that is, precisely done, really good details in it, great first submission, takes very little time for our planning staff to go through. And then we've got another one that is very poorly done, takes a lot more staff time, a lot of back and forth, a lot of hand-holding. What's your comment about both of those applications paying the same amount?
So it's the same everywhere else. So you do have some that certainly don't take as much time, and you do have some that take longer. Unfortunately, that is the nature of the beast, but that goes for conservation authorities, that goes for county, that goes for regions, no matter what. Ultimately, those that take less time versus those that take more time, they even themselves out. So ultimately, in the end, the municipality is not out of pocket because the way that the consultant works is to ensure that you're revenue neutral. And they have taken that situation in those scenarios where you do have applications that don't take as much time versus those that do. And they've basically come up with a median to ensure that, ultimately the town's costs are covered. And that's ultimately, in the end, what you want as a municipality to ensure you're not out of pocket for applications that are filed to develop and build homes or otherwise, or commercial or industrial uses in your community.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here tonight. Understand you had a bit of a issue getting here, and we really appreciate you.
I wasn't sure I was going to make it. I was online, but somehow, I guess, a Christmas miracle was made. So I'm here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks again. So I have a mover and a seconder, please, that the delegation be received. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Sorry, who's my mover and seconder? Well, that would be Councillor Richardson and Councillor Zanella. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. My last mistake, hopefully, of the year. Now we'll move on to item 4.4, which is the subject of the last delegation, which is the report about the planning fees. And ask for a mover and a seconder for this, and then we'll go to questions. Councillor Saunders and Deputy Mayor Fowler, questions or comments on this report? Councillor Waters.
I was just going to say that one of the things that we did is we have pre-consultation services, which I think should streamline those poorly submitted applications, so that hopefully we are on the positive end as opposed to a neutral end. So I think I think they were great things that we did, and I think they really improved the process so that developers know, they should know already, but in just case for people who are new, that they have that service ahead of time, they know exactly what they have to do, and so hopefully that alleviates any pains down the road for the planning staff. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I had a couple. So regardless of my question to Mr. McKinnon, my understanding is the calls I get is not typically a professional developer that does this for a living all the time. It's the homeowner building their first house and not understanding the process. And they're the ones that are really taking up, I think, a lot of staff time. And I think that's okay, that they're paying the same as the developer, because they don't do this every day. And if it's a benefit to a resident by having that fixed fee so they know exactly what their budget is, I think that's a really good move. As to the split of the old system for before 2024 and then the new system starting January 1st, 2024, Director Lee, can you give me a sense of how long you think there's going to be that gap where you're going to be working on two different systems, or when it'll all be rolled into the new system?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan, for the question. We're going to assess it throughout 2024 because we also want to continue to look at, are the fixed fees actually fully recovering the staff time involved? But the intent is we're continuing to move forward with all of the planning and engineering subdivision applications right now. We're trying to get to conclusion of those. So we're hopeful through 2024, maybe part of 2025, that we can get to conclusion on many of those, and then solely have the one set of fees going forward. Mayor Dolan, if I can just go back to your last comment as well in terms of, equity amongst one that takes more time versus less time. One of the components of the fees review, in addition to the pre-consultation, it has been identified that there will be an engineering pre-consultation, so clear understanding of engineering drawings at the start of a process, so trying to streamline the numbers of submissions. But the fees bylaw does also speak to the fact that if you go beyond 3 submissions, you will be billed for that additional time. So that would help to offset some of those potentially poor submissions and ongoing work by staff that there would continue to be beyond the fixed fee.
Thank you, Director. I missed that. Thank you for pointing that out. And it does also mention in the report that now, well, for 2024, you're going to still keeping your hourly rates. And I think that's good too, because I think in the end, imperative that growth pays for growth, or at least development fees pay for development fees, and that it's not borne by the taxpayer. But I do a side job where I have to track my hours, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of administrative burden. And it did mention in the report the savings of that time as well. Now, not for 2024, because you're going to still have to do it, but 2025 and beyond, not having to track, oh, I spent this much time on this phone call with this developer and this much time on this phone call with this developer, and how that can be administratively burdensome to keep.
Yeah, just on that point, Mayor Dolan, I think it's important to understand that, that staff time is not just from a planning and growth team, but it's also the finance team in terms of processing all those timesheets and payroll. So, it's beyond just the planning and growth. It's a corporate sort of efficiency savings as we evolve that process.
Thank you. Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. I'm glad to hear that there's going to be some efficiencies with the new processes. I was just, I think I read in the report about a reduction of fees if we get outside of certain timelines. And then I look at the planning survey on page 31, and it talks about only 33% of the developers in the survey agreed or strongly agreed that the town had timely processing. Is it, will there be, am I thinking about it right, as if we get penalized by it taking longer and they're telling us that in their view, it's taking too long, will there be cost ramifications to that?
So through you, Mayor Dolan, to Councillor Ices, the way the recommendations are outlined is that the intent is to conduct annual surveys to assess whether we are meeting the timelines. The other component that was mentioned was the fact that there are the Bill 109 implications, and those specific implications are provincial legislation, identify timelines, and if we don't achieve those timelines, which is what the BMA report is speaking to, that there are penalty provisions of refund of fees through that process. So that's the specific piece that BMA is looking at. But there were also a number of other process improvements that were identified through this fees and process improvements. Planning and development engineering are going to be and already have started to implement some of those. They are going to be continuing to map the processes, identifying how we can find efficiencies, how we can get to approvals with conditions. So every measure that we can consider in terms of efficiency in the process is being identified, but also those additional pre-consultation pieces to make sure everyone is clear at the start of the process on what the expectations are, what the requirements are, is intended to provide additional assistance to an applicant, but also to the town in providing that clarity. And then there are a number of the other recommendations that speak to providing standard operating procedures and processes and having those available on the website. So as those are being completed, those will be shared so that everyone can understand and it's a transparent process and timeline.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor of the recommendations? I want to thank Director Lee and her team for all their hard work and the developer liaison group for all their hard work in getting this done. I know my phone will ring a lot less. Thank you. Next, we'll go to the confirming bylaw, moved by Councillor Constantine, seconded by Councillor Zanella. All those in favor? That's carried. And just before we go to adjournment, there's no opportunity in special council meetings for announcements, but I did just want to quickly make one quick one, which was a very generous gift from Sobeys Foodland Corporation to the Troy Scott Community Fridge in honor of Troy Scott, who was a franchise owner, $10,000 to our fridge program, which was so very generous and much needed, particularly this time of year. And finally, just to wish everyone a very, very happy holiday. To council, again, thank you for coming, and staff, thank you for coming in this extra night so close to Christmas, and I wish everybody lots of R&R over the holidays, or lots of whatever makes you happy. And we'll see you all in 2024 on January the 10th. So a mover and a seconder, please, to adjourn at 8:03. 8:05 on my clock, 8:03 on the wall clock. Take your pick. Councillor Waters and Councillor Richardson, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you, everyone, for participating.